Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone. Happy World Wildlife Day. It's a pleasure to be with you all today. I'm Jorge Rios from the UN Office on Drugs and Crime, and I'm fortunate enough to run the Environmental Crime Program here at UNODC. It's a real pleasure to moderate today's event entitled the EU Action Plan Against Wildlife Trafficking, Lessons Learned, Challenges, and Opportunities, as we all celebrate today the recovering key species for ecosystem restoration. I don't think, given today's issues linking a majority of our nature, the challenges, the plethora of challenges to nature, that there could have been a better title for today's celebration of wildlife. Also, it's very important that we meet against this backdrop to understand some of the opportunities, the successes, and the challenges of implementing the EU Action Plan Against Wildlife Trafficking, which, as many of you know, was adopted in 2016. Now, before I give the floor to our keynote speeches, let me just say that from our end, we very much support the issues of conservation, management, but we're also very well aware that unless we address the criminal justice issues linked to the trafficking of wild fauna and flora, we will not be able to save the number of species that are trafficked, exploited, and traded, and that our world would be worse off. And I think it's against that background that we're all able to celebrate, but it also gives us a moment to reflect on the impact that we are having on our natural world and how this is impacting a majority of the issues that shape the way we live, namely development, human health, security, really the way we interact with nature. So that having been said, just in closing, before I turn over to the keynote addresses, with respect to some housekeeping issues, let me just say that if the audience, if you have any questions or comments, I ask you to please paste them in the chat. And what we'll try to do is we will attempt to get to them during the event, which I must stress, given the agenda of many of our colleagues, will close at 16 o'clock Central European time promptly. There'll be a high-level opening segment and two technical panels today, which I will moderate the first, and Tanya Wyatt will moderate the second panel. So again, happy World Wildlife Day. It's great to have so many people with us, and I expect that we'll have a fantastic array of presentations, some interesting comments and questions so that we can all better understand the challenges and the opportunities that we have to save our natural world and specifically our wildlife. So I ask my colleagues, please, to get ready for the first keynote address, and it's my distinct pleasure to welcome our first speaker, Mr. Virginijus Sinkevičius, who is the EU Commissioner for the Environment, Oceans and Fisheries. You have the floor, sir.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and thank you for this invitation. It's rather sad to spend the World Wildlife Day talking about wildlife trafficking, but we all understand the reasons for that. When we consider that more than 1 million species are threatened with extinction and that trafficking is one of the reasons behind the threat, we understand the urgency. And of course, there are direct impacts on security, economic development, and possibly even on human health, as highlighted by the COVID-19 pandemic. So actually a very good idea to look closely at what we are doing to stop this illegal trade, at progress we have made with the 2016 action plan, and at where to focus in the future. Looking back, we have done a lot. Enforcement has been enhanced, and there have been more cross-border investigations with more seizures and prosecutions. There have also been awareness-raising campaigns with a view to reducing demand for wildlife products. In 2018, we set up a new platform, the Environmental Compliance and Governance Forum, facilitating strategic exchanges for the many actors combating environmental crime. And we are sharpening one of the most powerful tools. Back in December, the Commission adopted a proposal for a new directive on environmental crime. It clarifies sanctions, strengthens the enforcement chain, and does more to recognize the role of the civil society. One major component is strengthening the capacity of people who work in detection, investigation, and prosecution. We have also been very active at the international level. In recent years, we have made major investments in the protection of biodiversity, anti-poaching, and anti-trafficking efforts in Africa, Asia, and Latin America. We have integrated the sustainable use and management of wildlife into many priorities of EU, external partnerships and cooperation, from biodiversity conservation to supporting alternative livelihoods close to protected areas. We are also supporting the fight against armed groups who make money trafficking in natural resources. And here we also support the work of international organizations, such as the International Consortium on Combating Wildlife Crime and its members. And we collaborate with the IUCN, UNOPS, and the FAO at regional level. One of our top priorities is the fight against ivory trafficking. That's why in December last year, the Commission took strong action against elephant poaching in Africa, with further restrictions on ivory trade in and from the EU. These new measures will ban most forms of the EU trade in ivory, finally consigning it to the past. Looking to the future and preparations for Conference of Parties of the Convention on International Trade in Endangered Species of Wild Fauna and Flora, to be held in Panama in November, the EU has been playing a proactive role. We are developing proposals to extend CITES to new species threatened by international trade, including several marine species and tropical timber. We are doing this in partnership with the affected signatories, and we will soon be publishing the proposals. Overall, I think it's fair to say that the EU Wildlife Action Plan has taken a comprehensive approach, and we have seen positive results. But at the same time, criminal networks have continued to expand, putting ever more pressure on species that were already suffering. The situation will not change until the international community step up its efforts to protect biodiversity and dismantle these criminal networks. Europe is determined to do more. The ongoing evaluation and revision of the EU Wildlife Action Plan is an opportunity to ensure that the fight against wildlife trafficking becomes a priority for the longer term. The feedback we have received from citizens and stakeholders organizations has been extremely valuable, and we continue to build on that, fine-tuning the action plan for the future. I'd like to take this opportunity to thank both the UN Office on Drugs and Crime and the Wildlife Conservation Society for their commitment to fighting wildlife trafficking and for sharing their expertise. We have everything to gain from closer cooperation as work to tackle one of the major scourges of our time. Many thanks for organizing this event. It's an extremely useful platform, which I'm sure it will help consolidate and strengthen our efforts to fight trafficking together. Thank you.
Now what I'd like to do is give the floor for some welcoming remarks to Ms. Hilde Valkmans, who's the member of the European Parliament and the chairwoman of the members of the European Parliament for Wildlife.
Dear panelists, dear wildlife supporters, World Wildlife Day is always highlighted in my agenda. As the president of MEPs for Wildlife, it's one of my favorite international days of the United Nations. A day where we celebrate our incredible wildlife and nature, but also a day where we raise awareness for the challenges that we are facing. Today, we draw attention to wildlife trafficking to address the question of panel 1, why an EU action plan against wildlife trafficking? It constitutes one of the most immediate threats to biodiversity. Wildlife crime or the illegal trade does not stop at our borders, and Europe remains one of the main destinations, transit and source regions for illegal wildlife products. The existing measures are not enough, and there is still a lot to be done. But maybe even more important than new legislation is the correct implementation of the 32 measures from the EU Action Plan. As chairwoman of MEPs for Wildlife, this will be one of my main priorities. Unfortunately, I could not be able to attend in person, but I wish you a very fruitful and interesting event. It's very important that this is addressed on a European level. We have an impressive and incredible wildlife and nature. It's our duty to respect and mostly protect it.
Dear ladies and gentlemen, let me first congratulate the UNODC for setting up this important and timely event on World Wildlife Day. Environmental crime, and as a key part of it, wildlife crime, has been a crime priority for the EU and Europol for several years now. Last year, this priority status was again confirmed for the coming years in the framework of the EU policy cycle, the Impact 2022+. At Europol, we have a dedicated team to work on environmental and wildlife crimes. Its activities are closely aligned with the European Union's action plan on wildlife trafficking. Europol's flagship threat assessment, the SOCTA 2021, underlines that the EU remains an important location for wildlife crime and a very lucrative business. In particular, we see that traffickers are increasingly targeting endemic European species. The illegal trafficking of the European eels to China, for example, generates an estimate 2.5 billion euro annually. As part of the impact priority on environmental crime, Europol supported a number of operational actions of EU member states and international partners on trafficking of commodities, including ivory, timber, reptiles, birds, and glass eels. Let me give you an example. Many of you may know Operation Lake. This Europe-wide annual operation targets the trafficking of European eels, a protected species which has seen its population decrease for 90% in the recent years. Last year, Europol coordinated the 5th edition of this operation that involved law enforcement authorities from 24 countries. OLAF, the EU Wildlife Enforcement Group, and the EU Food Fraud Network. It has been a huge success. Operation Lake 5 led to 58,000 inspections across Europe, 52 arrests, and the seizure of over 1 million euro worth glass eels. Looking ahead, I believe we have to further invest and increase our engagement in 4 areas in particular. Firstly, document fraud. Document fraud, which is key facilitator of such a criminal activity. Protected wildlife is often trafficked using falsified shipping documents and permits. Secondly, the digital domain. Sellers and buyers use online marketplaces and social media to advertise and carry out their illegal activity. We need to monitor this online component. Thirdly, financial investigation. We need to follow the money trails of this lucrative criminal business. Fourthly, and finally, international cooperation. Organized crime groups in this area are working across borders more than ever before, in the EU and beyond. Our aim at Europol is to further strengthen our international partnerships and outreach to address this threat. With this, I thank you for your attention and I wish you a very successful event.
And we will now continue with the first panel, where the topic will be a discussion on the EU policy on wildlife trafficking. And we have a fantastic group of panelists today to talk about different elements of this policy. The first is Mr. Jorge Rodriguez Romero. Hi, Jorge. He's the Deputy Head of Unit at DG Environment. And then we have Ms. Diana Perez Aranda Serrano, who is the National Coordinator of the CITES Management Authority of Spain and the Spanish Action Plan Against Wildlife Trafficking and International Poaching of Wildlife Species at the Ministry for the Ecological Transition of the Demographic Challenge of Spain. And we have my colleague, Ms. Olga Kuzmionak, Senior Program Officer, covering our work with the International Consortium to Combat Wildlife Crime, and Mr. Arnold Gozens, the Associate Director of EU Policy at Wildlife Conservation Society. So, to set the scene for the panel discussion today, I'd kindly ask Jorge Rodrigo Romero to share with us, hi Jorge, a 5-minute presentation on the EU Action Plan Against Wildlife Trafficking and its current revision. Jorge, good to see you. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Jorge, and I will try to be brief. Thanks a lot for the organization of this meeting. I think it's very timely, not only because it's the World Wildlife Day, very precisely today, but because we are in this very moment of evaluation and revision of the Wildlife Action Plan. It is also a very important year for CITES and for the wildlife trade policy because, well, only next week we will be attending in Lyon the standing committee after a couple of years of the difficulties, of course, to progress the work. So we look forward to this, and of course later in the year we have the Conference of the Parties in Panama in November, which will be a very important event. So I'm happy to report quickly on what we are doing at the moment on the EU Action Plan. Next slide, please. As you know, this action plan was adopted in 2016 and is basically the framework that the EU and its member states have to fight against wildlife trafficking. So the plan itself had the revision plan for 2020 after 5 years. We're a bit delayed, but we are doing this at the moment, and we are planning to publish later on. Next slide, please. So. Don't see the next slide. Yeah, thank you very much. So just to recall that this evaluation, this revision is part of a commitment that the Commission got in the EU Biodiversity Strategy for 2030, which is part of the European Green Deal. So this has been highlighted there as a step to try to improve the fight against wildlife trafficking. Next slide, please. So the objectives of the action plan, just to recall, is put wildlife trafficking higher on the political agenda. I think we have achieved that in the past years. There are many signs and signals that support this statement. And going beyond the environmental domain, certainly to work across the board with enforcement authorities, for example, with many other domains, experts and authorities. We were trying to turn the political commitments into action through a set of actions that basically were calling on not only on the EU bodies, but also on member states, on business associations, on businesses that are involved in the transport or in the trade in endangered species, and a wide set of other stakeholders. Next slide, please. The action was structured in 3 priorities. The first was dealing with prevention, addressing, including actions such as reduction of demand and supply, engage with the business sector, address corruption, and engage with local communities. Then the second pillar was enforcement, improve enforcement, improve implementation of existing rules, training. We have progressed quite significantly in training member states officers in customs, in enforcement authorities. So the awareness of wildlife trafficking has increased quite significantly. There was a focus already there on organized crime, something that has through the years become more and more important. And then, yes, other instruments of cooperation with judiciary and with police enforcement, for example, Europol and so on. And then third, very important pillar, global partnership. We work with third countries in order to strengthen their capacities to fight illegal wildlife trade, address links with security, which are very important, and yeah, we have reinforced our international action quite substantially. Next slide, please. So some positive outcomes. We published in 2018 a progress report on the Wildlife Action Plan, but we are now evaluating it, and we have some preliminary findings. Certainly, we have raised the profile of the wildlife trafficking. Sometimes it's difficult to identify whether the Wildlife Action Plan was in itself successful or how much it contributed to it, but certainly the result of these years of implementation of the Wildlife Action Plan, together with many other actions that other actors have taken, have resulted in a significant awareness raising on the problem of the wildlife trafficking, and definitely international organizations such as UNODC have also contributed very importantly to this. Increased EU funding. This is also an effect that this is clearly linked to the commitments on the Wildlife Action Plan. We have mobilized much more our delegations, our networks across the world to cooperate with third countries. We have reinforced cooperation between enforcement authorities. We have also made a number of adjustments and improvements to the legal framework and to the implementation, including, for example, on ivory trade very recently. Next slide, please. There are, however, some challenges that have emerged, and there are more, and I'm sure we will hear from other panelists and other speakers. I think it's a complex phenomenon, wildlife trafficking, and it's becoming more and more transnational and more complex, and it's changing over time, changing on the specimens that are traded, the species that are in focus, the trading routes, etc. So this is really a challenge for enforcement authorities, certainly. The impact on local communities, the lack of capacity of many actors, authorities, here in the EU even ourselves. I mean, we would have liked to have more resources devoted to the implementation of the Wildlife Action Plan. There is, of course, the discussion ongoing about the connections between wildlife trade and the spread of zoonotic diseases. There is an agenda point on the standing committee next week about this issue. There has been a working group working in CITES, how CITES could contribute to the debate about zoonotic diseases. And very important aspect that is already for a number of years very significant and very difficult to tackle is the increased online trade. And this is something that certainly will be in focus in the next years. Next slide, please. Very quickly on the process, and I'm finishing the consultations. We had open public consultations and targeted expert consultations. Some of you have been interviewed in this process by our consultant supporting us in the review of the Wildlife Action Plan. This was held in the last trimester of last year, and we are holding a stakeholder workshop online, a webinar workshop, online workshop on the 16th of March. So some of you may have received already the invitation for that workshop, but if you have not received an invitation and you are interested in joining, you are very welcome to contact us in this email address that you see on the screen, env-cites@eceuropa.eu, because you will then receive an invitation. So you are welcome to join. It will be a stakeholder workshop about the Wildlife Action Plan revision, and we are very happy to have this discussion today as a kind of pre-discussion also for our workshop that we will organize on the 16th of March. Next slide, please. We will be in the second quarter of this year in the drafting process of the evaluation and the new action plan, and we expect to adopt it after summer. Next slide, please. So I think that's all from my side, and I hope this clarifies a bit the framework of what we are doing. Thanks a lot.
All right, thank you very much for the really comprehensive and excellent presentation, which really sets the scene for this panel. I think the outcomes that you identified, addressing the supply and demand and the importance of partnerships are exactly what I think most of us have come to understand are very important elements to follow, and some of the challenges that you identify, I think, are very understandable and real to many of us working also in addressing wildlife crime. And I'm hoping that we'll hear from the panelists exactly how they're working with this the EU action plan. But a question to you is, given that there's more and more of an understanding that the loss of biodiversity through illegal trade, through trafficking, through poaching, is really impacting on our degrading our ecosystems and impacting biodiversity. How is it that do you see a way in which the EU action plan can be integrated or used to address these broader issues of biodiversity loss, perhaps linked to the climate change agenda?
Yes, well, thanks very much. Indeed, I mean, the overall context in which we are revising now the Wildlife Action Plan is very different from 2016. We have in these years seen how the awareness of biodiversity loss has increased quite substantially. This year is a very important year for CITES, as I said before, but it's also a very important year for biodiversity and for climate. There is a increased awareness that this crisis of climate and biodiversity loss are impacting quite dramatically on the lives of people, on the future, on the economic activities, on local livelihoods, and there is an urgent need to take action. So all the discussions about the post-2020 global biodiversity framework in the context of the CBD are really a very important aspect that to which the Wildlife Action Plan should and will be tied in and will contribute to, definitely. And the context we have, certainly in the EU, is one that all these issues are much more at the top of the political agenda with the European Green Deal. So we see really here an opportunity to reinforce the action in this regard and to strengthen these actions into delivering on the ground.
Thank you, Jorge, for really clarifying how the EU action plan will contribute to the broader agendas that all of us are in one way or another addressing. So based on not only the scene that we have now, but also the first discussion we had afterwards, let me turn the next question over to Ms. Diana Perez Aranda Serrano, from who manages is the national coordinator and the CITES Management Authority. at the CITES Management Authority of Spain. And so we have the EU action plan, and obviously, you know, we have to ensure that national action plans in a way align, yeah, and complement, etc. So let me ask Diana, first of all, welcome, Diana.
Thank you very much.
What is the approval of the Spanish action plan meant for wildlife trafficking, the elements for against wildlife trafficking in Spain been?
Yeah, the Spanish, well, thank you very much for inviting Spain and for inviting me to this very interesting webinar. I hope you can hear me well. Can you? Yes?
Yeah,
okay.
Perfect. Yeah.
Okay. I continue. I don't know if people listening to this webinar knows, but Spain was the first or one of the first member states that adapted the EU action plan against wildlife trafficking to our national context. And we did it in 2018 through the approval of our own national action plan that we call Plan TIFIES for its acronym in Spain. In Spanish, it would be Plan contra el tráfico ilegal y el furtivismo internacional de especies silvestres. And this TIFIES plan was approved and elaborated by 5 ministries. So it doesn't mean that it is not only the commitment of the ministry that I'm representing here, the Ministry for the Ecological Transition, but it represents the commitment of the government of Spain to tackle this crime. And the plan includes actions at the national level and actions in third countries of origin of poaching that if we have time in the debate, we can talk about that later. But well, going back to the question made by Jorge, what has it meant for Spain, the approval of this TIFIES plan? In one sentence, we can say that it has meant a boost to police investigations against wildlife trafficking. And why is that? That's because the plan has served to establish a common framework under which the different departments develop connected actions, that before these actions used to be developed independently. So this common framework in turn has led to the development of a very narrow collaborative relationship that is giving very good results. And I'm particularly talking about the relationship between the ministry with competences in environmental matters, this is the Ministry for the Ecological Transition, and the administration with competences in the prosecution and investigation of environmental crime. That this is the Civil Guards Nature Protection Service, that in Spain is called the SEPRONA. So the collaboration between these two bodies is giving rise to a boost in these police investigations. This collaboration was officially established with the adoption of a protocol that was signed between these two bodies that was signed right after the approval of the TIFIES plan. And now talking about tangible and concrete things, because so far we are talking about collaboration, protocol. So the 2 key actions that I want to highlight and that are included in this collaborative protocol that are giving place to this boost in training for law enforcement agents and the extended use of science and technology to support police investigations on CITES seized specimens. I'm not sure how long I've got, how much
Diana,
time, but
I'm sorry, Diana, if I interrupt, you froze while you were explaining the 2 key actions. Yeah, not your fault. It's the technical part. If you could just tell us the two key points again under the protocol.
Sure, yes. So the 2 key actions are the provision of specialized training for law enforcement agents, so training, and the extended use of science and technology to support police investigations on CITES seized specimens.
Okay.
So, for example, this training that we've been, so from 2018 to 2021, we have organized 24 training courses that have been attended by more than 500 agents, SEPRONA agents. And this training mainly is a preparatory training that is taught before the operations. So these are specific courses for specific operations. Let's say there is an operation against ivory trafficking. So then the course is for ivory identification, and the agents will learn broadly how to distinguish with whether a piece, a carved piece is made of ivory, is made of bone, is it resin, or is it wood? And in case it is ivory, what animal does it belong to? Is it elephant, mammoth, morse, hippo, facocero? So basic things so that they can be more capacitated when they do the operation. This type of courses are very practical, and we use real specimens of the different species and the different materials so that they can learn with the pieces in their hands how to distinguish them. We also have other kind of courses, such as specific courses for the identification of woods that will be followed by an operation against wood trafficking. Other courses, such as, for example, how to search and analyze evidences of online trafficking using open internet sources. So that would be some examples of one of the elements that was the training, and the second element, that is the use of science with more emphasis for the investigations of the police. And in this element, the scientific element, I would like to highlight two techniques in which we have helped or supported for their development, or we have helped to fine-tuning the techniques and adapted them for the purpose that we want. In this case is, for example, the carbon-14 dating of ivory. That is, well, it's a scientific and objective method that allows to know the age of the ivory piece. This is how many years ago the elephant produced that ivory. You know, this is important because the regulation and the exceptions or allowances to trade antiques are different if it is not antiquity. So this method that we are now using for investigations has proven that the previous system that was used in Spain to verify the age of a piece was a weak system. That system consisted just in getting a certificate issued by an antique dealer, and that's a very subjective criteria, and that also hides possible conflicts of interest. So we are not longer applying that system. And another example in which we are using technology and science for CITES investigations is through through a kit to discriminate CITES timber species. This kit is made of a guide and a magnifying glass. Those are the two elements. The guide is a very graphic guide in which there are many illustrations of the macroscopic characteristics of the wood specimens, of the wood species, of the anatomy of the wood. The pictures, they are really real pictures taken with magnifying glass that enlarges the images 400 times. So together with this guide, with all the images, there has to be used a small device that is also a magnifying glass that is attached, that you can attach it to the cell phone, and it will also amplified by 400 times the images that you've got in the cell phone. So if you have a sample of wood, a wood that is being traded, you take a sample of wood, you cut it as it has to be cut in a specific way, and you put it through the cell phone, you could see here the image of the structure, the anatomical structure of this wood. So by comparing the image that you've got in the cell phone with the image of the morphological structure for this same species, according to the guide, the custom staff or police authorities can determine whether it's the same species or not, the same species that is described in the papers. That is, sorry, I don't find the word now. Well, if it's the same species, if it's not the same species, it has to the merchandise should be immobilized. So this tool serves as an early warning system that can be used by non-specialized staff. And this has also been used for different operations. It's giving very good results. It needs at least 1 week of training because it's not easy to get familiarized with the terminology and the different parts and anatomy of the wood. But well, this guide is available in Spanish and in English. It is online and it will be soon posted as well on the website of the CITES Secretariat. For anybody who wants to use it, can use it, because the goal is to stop wildlife trafficking all over the world. So it is for free. It is free of use. So yeah, this is what I wanted to talk about. Let's say that the take-home message is that through the implementation of the EU Action Plan in Spain, we have developed a very close collaboration between different administrations that is giving very fruitful results. We are very happy and proud with the results, and we consider that this collaboration between the administration with competences in environmental matters and the administration that prosecutes and investigates this environmental crime, this collaboration between these two bodies is a model to be exported to other countries.
Okay.
And of course, we would like to enlarge this collaboration, this close collaboration with other bodies. For that, it was already foreseen in the DFIES plan, because one of the actions is the creation of a national central office for the analysis of information on illegal environmental activities. And this office, this national central office, was created just last month, and it will integrate also other administrations, such as, for example, the General Attorney's Office and other bodies and entities from the state and the regional governments. And the aim of this National Central Office precisely is to improve the coordination between the different bodies and increase the information exchange between the different administrations. So yeah, we are working in this direction to be better connected between administrations, because we see that that's key to success in fighting wildlife trafficking.
All right, Diana, thank you very much for broad view of the Spanish action plan, but also some of the specific details of how it's moving forward. And first of all, to congratulate Spain for being the first member state to actually adopt and use the action plan as an important element for its national strategy. I think that's to be lauded. And clearly, the work that you're doing, both on the capacity building side, but also on the partnership side. Now that's probably a good segue into what I'd like to ask. And thank you very much, Diana, for participating and for your presentation. But that leads me to the question I'd like to ask my colleague Olga, who works really on promoting and ensuring that the partnership with the International Consortium to for wildlife crime is actually active. So, Olga, can you, given your role in putting all of these 5 agencies to work together, can you give us an idea about the importance from your end of international cooperation and partnerships to support the EU action plan, and how this translates not only into policy, but also into action on the ground?
Thank you very much, Jorge, for this introduction. And I would like to start by congratulating all of the panelists, but also wishing everyone a happy World Wildlife Day. And actually, earlier this week, I had the pleasure to meet the sunrise at a national park in Kenya, together with the colleagues from UNODC, EU Commissioner, Kenya Wildlife Service, taking many pictures of the majestic Big Five and other endangered species while celebrating the zero poaching at the park for the last 2 years. Kenyan law provisions up for a life sentence for wildlife trafficking, and the increase in investigations, deterrent sentencing, community involvement, as well as international cooperation have resulted in a dramatic decline of poaching in the country since 2016. Actually, only a handful of countries can boast such results due to transnational nature of wildlife crime, which involves more than one operator, from poachers to middlemen to traders, and it doesn't stop at the borders, which means it cannot be dismantled by one institution. International cooperation, be it formal or informal, is the only way to substantially and sustainably disrupt criminal networks involved in the trafficking of wild fauna and flora, including animals, birds, and fish, and their products. With the goal of fostering international cooperation, in 2010, 5 intergovernmental organizations, UNODC, CITES Secretariat, Interpol, the World Customs Organization, and the World Bank, formed International Consortium on Combating Wildlife Crime, as we say, ICWIC, with a mission to strengthen criminal justice systems and to increase international cooperation. Leveraging on each other's mandates, the ICWIC partners have access to an extensive global network that allows the consortium to provide targeted support to the countries, facilitate access to secure communication channels, and increase intelligence-led investigations. Our work has focused on building the knowledge about the modus operandi and the national needs to address wildlife and forest crime by conducting assessments through the flagship tools that we call Wildlife and Forest Crime Analytic Toolkit and Indicator Framework developed by the consortium. The EU Action Plan actually makes a reference and specific mention of these tools, and we have now implemented them in over 30 countries. The Action Plan also dedicates a specific objective to international cooperation and supports, among other partners, ICWIC. Over the last 6 years, we have assisted more than 40 countries together. The specialized support to law enforcement has resulted in the increase of operations, apprehension of over 2,000 offenders, countless seizures, and dismantling of several criminal networks. You'll hear some examples in the second panel today. This work demonstrated that a strong commitment to international cooperation with our counterpart in the end yields positive results. We have contributed to the increase in quality prosecutions with deterrent sentencing. However, while the profits continue to be generated from wildlife trafficking, we need to consolidate every effort to continue making wildlife and timber trafficking unattractive and difficult business for the criminals. The cross-border challenges make it incumbent upon us to continue working together across borders and continents. Later this year, ICWIC will launch Vision 2030 to end wildlife crime, and we look forward to continuing to work with member states in partnership with the EU, impact civil society organizations to address this challenge. Thank you very much, Jorge.
Thanks very much, Olga, for covering that part, and I'm glad you were able to be in Nairobi for the UNEA and also have an opportunity to work with the delegation there and the commissioner to really appreciate the beauty of what it is we're trying to protect. Now that, all of this, I think, puts into light the many facets of the EU Action Plan, and in particular, what Jorge was mentioning, the outcomes and the challenges, et cetera. But all good plans, always have something else that could be used to perhaps strengthen or improve it just a little bit. As we know, something perfect is unachievable, but we can always identify a couple of things that may need to be considered. And that's the question I'd like to pose to Arnaud. Is what elements, hi Arnaud, what elements do you think could be introduced or could be strengthened in the current draft of the EU Action Plan with respect to making it more effective at the policy level?
Thank you very much, Jorge, and good afternoon, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here today. Well, I believe the most crucial aspect is the importance to address the entire wildlife trafficking supply chain, from source countries to transit and consumer countries, and really avoiding working in silos, as it is often the case. We need to see concrete actions that tackle wildlife trafficking in a truly holistic approach. Otherwise, we won't get any successful and long-term results. So at the level of consumer countries, we need to see more science-based behavior change initiatives to effectively reduce demand for illegal wildlife. And this with a particular attention to Asia, where the demand is extremely high. The EU is also an important destination market for illegal wildlife. So a new important action should be the implementation of new regulations to ensure that non-CITES listed species that are illegally taken from the wild in third countries are also prohibited in the EU, which would be something similar to the Lacey Act in the United States. And this would close a significant loophole in the EU wildlife trade regulations. Now, regarding transit countries, more efforts needs to focus on cooperation with the private sector, including the transport industry, online platforms, and the finance sector, which all have a key role in detecting and combating wildlife trafficking. And finally, at the very beginning of the supply chain, further supporting source countries is also critical. Increased financial and technical support is needed for local authorities and local communities to further develop and strengthen their capacity in protecting their environments and wildlife. Lastly, we must also recognize that, as Olga just mentioned, that wildlife trafficking is a global issue that needs to be further addressed at the global level through multilateral fora such as CITES, and through, for example, the development of an additional protocol specifically on wildlife and forest crime under the United Nations Convention Against Transnational Organized Crime, known as UNTOC. So these are some of the actions that could have really a great impact in this new EU action plan. And also I wanted to mention that last year, President von der Leyen announced that the EU will double its funding for biodiversity globally. So it would be great to see this doubling in funding also translated in addressing wildlife trafficking in partner countries. And this could help funding the recommendation of reports such as larger than tigers, larger than elephants, and larger than jaguars, which were all commissioned by DG International Partnerships.
Arnaud, thank you very much for a very detailed reply to elements that could help strengthen the current work on the EU action plan. I'm particularly, happy or pleased that you raised something where if it's illegally sourced in a third country, it should be legal also in the EU. I think that's, that to me is a very important element in anything that we move forward. And if I understand correctly, the new EU directive may also be looking at something like this in its work. So, but you also raised the issue of supply and demand, and so since Jorge opened the floor and set the context, and today I just came back from the Natural History Museum here in Vienna, where we celebrated with them World Wildlife Day, and there were several questions actually on what is it can citizens do? It's not only the source areas, but it's the consumers on the other end. But we as citizens, when we travel, or we as citizens where we live, what can we do immediately to help support the efforts to stop wildlife traffic and trade, besides donating money? That's probably not the answer. But Jorge, what would you think is a good answer to what is it the average citizen can do?
Yes, thanks very much. Well, I think I must say that one of the things that surprised me most when I joined the world of CITES and wildlife trade is the amount of demand that are for all kinds of exotic animals. And the numbers of those exotic animals that are hosted in homes in Europe, in the EU, is very impressive. So very impressive. This caught my attention very quickly, and indeed, well, then you get into the intricacies of this world, of this area, and you see that this is indeed very quite context specific. So not in all countries this is so prevalent, but I mean there is a demand, and there is I think there is a work to do to raise awareness of what means having such animals, having such demand for animals that can be endangered, that or are also taken out of their environment, maybe hosted in not the best conditions. It can be, there are also escapes. There's some of them become then invasive or aggressive for the local environment. There are all kinds of things that we have seen, and increasing the awareness of citizens about all these aspects and all these problems is always something that is beneficial, I think, for fighting illegal wildlife trade. Because if there is wildlife trafficking, is because there is a demand. So acting on the demand side is an important aspect. We always, and Arnaud has mentioned, the demand from Asia is very high on many species that are endangered. That demand has driven very worrying declines of populations of some species. But we have also our responsibility in the EU, because we have very important market for example, reptiles and so on. That's why we are cooperating with third countries as well, to include in the CITES appendixes a number of every COP we cooperate with third countries to include those species for which there is demand in the EU, so that we contribute to the regulation of those and to prevent its unsustainable exploitation, basically. So that's a complex matter, but certainly management of demand is an important aspect.
All right, thank you very much. And before I close, there's a nice comment here in the chat from Gerard, talking about the importance of capacity building and looking at things in different levels. And in that regard, Let me just also mention to Diana that we look forward to the identification material you were mentioning for enforcement officers that will be posted on the CITES website. Colleagues, thanks. I found the panel super with respect to really a transparent discussion on the strengths and weaknesses of the things that we're all doing, particularly the importance of moving forward with this EU action plan, the willingness to build on the previous one and strengthen it. And in that connection, I'd like to pass on my sincere appreciation to Jorge for setting the scene for us, for Diana, for joining us from Spain, for Olga, to talking about the issue of cooperation, and to Arnaud for providing some elements that we can all think about, or the EU can think about, as it moves forward with its consultations on its EU action plan. And from UNODC, we look forward to working with all of you and look forward to the further consultations to ensure that the EU action plan is as strong, robust, and relevant as can be. So let me thank all the panelists for your time, for the information you've provided us. And now we're actually 5 minutes ahead of schedule. So this hardly ever happens here at UNODC. So let me, I think unless we go to the opening speech, to the welcoming remarks, I'll ask the Olga to let me know whether we go to the remarks that we were unable to play because of the audio technical difficulties, or we go straight into the panel that Tanya will moderate.
Jorge, if you are in agreement, let us try one more time to play the videos, because I know that the high-level speakers took their time to record them.
Certainly.
Let us try. Let us try one more time.
All right. Everyone keep their fingers crossed. So the first would be the EU Commissioner.
Oh, for Christ's sake.
Apologies, colleagues, still having some trouble here.
All right. So we really hope to be able to hear from the Commissioner, the MEP, and the Executive Director from Europol before we close, as they did take the time to provide their remarks, and it's important to hear from them. So, Tanya, are you here?
I am. Hello.
Hi, Tanya. Welcome.
Hi.
Before you start, let me just thank Diana for posting the link to the identification of timber species tool. Diana, muchísimas gracias. Tanya, panel 2 is yours, so I hand the floor over to you. It's nice to see you, Tanya.
Lovely, thank you. And yes, happy World Wildlife Day to everyone. Panel 2 is going to be about strategic areas to address wildlife trafficking globally. And we have, first, we're going to start off actually with 2 presentations. As you can see there from the screen, that'll be by Ms. Giovanna Murillo, the Program Manager for Counter Wildlife Trafficking at WCS in AAO. And then also we will have a presentation by Dr. Ting-Ming Li. He is a professor at San Yat-sen University and a visiting fellow at Oxford Martin. So I think we'll jump right in. If you're ready, Giovanna, you can share your screen for your 5-ish minute PowerPoint presentation.
Well, good morning, good afternoon, good night, everyone. Greetings from Lima, Peru. Well, I'm going to talk about our project here in Latin America, but first of all, I would like to mention that Latin America is one of the most biodiverse regions around the world. And not only that, this region provides important environmental resources and service to millions of people. The Alliance for Wildlife and Forests is a project supported by the European Union and implemented by Wildlife Conservation Society and World Wildlife Fund, executed in Bolivia, Ecuador, and Colombia. Peru, and 2-3 border areas with Brazil. This alliance has 3 objectives: improve a common understanding of the dynamics of wildlife and timber trafficking in the region, develop collaboration mechanisms between civil society and government agencies, also inform and engage civil society allies in the promotion and development of actions in cooperation with authorities. Well, since 2019, we have made different progress and achievements on improving a common understanding described in Andes Amazon countries. For example, we have developed different reports to describe the wildlife trafficking problem in this region. This we have this information, but also this information has been shared with the governmental decision makers. In addition, we have provided technical assistance in developing collaboration mechanisms between government agencies. For example, at national level, we have worked with different governments on combat wildlife trafficking strategies implementation. For example, in Peru and Colombia. At regional level, we also support with technical assistance on binational strategies implementation. For example, Colombia and Ecuador strategy, or different actions between Peru and Bolivia. All of this regarding to combat wildlife trafficking on these countries. As part of different progress and results, working with authorities, we have been strategizing law enforcement capacities. We have developed a curricula on counter wildlife trafficking in collaboration with different universities and authorities as customs and prosecutors in different countries that we are working or implementing this project. We have implemented different actions on demand reduction through communication campaigns and with civil society. Well, now we are working more on behavior change actions. However, there are still different challenges to face in our region. Counter wildlife trafficking is not considered a serious crime. Many investigative processes are not carried out for this reason. In addition, there is still a need for greater investment in actions to change the consumer behavior. Also connect different counter wildlife trafficking actions with different approach, such as the link between wildlife trafficking and zoonotic disease. And that's it. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Giovanna. We'll now move to Dr. Lee. So if you're there, Tian, you may share your screen and follow on with your presentation, please.
Thanks to the organizer, UNODC Wildlife Conservation Society, for inviting me to give a really short presentation on our work that is actually very related to the the demand reduction that many speakers in the panel before us, as well as the speaker before, actually talk about. So we are fortunate enough, a few years ago, got funded by the EU to do I would say a rather first of its kind and a large scale behavioral change project, looking to really think of new ways to nudge society in Asia in particular to reduce our I would say quite strong preference for illegal wildlife. So this is work done with the Wildlife Conservation Society and some of our partner units. I don't really have to talk too much about the IWT issue or illegal wildlife trade issue, except that I think one of the things that we need to focus on, like what Arnold said in the beginning or during the discussion, during the panel, is really the whole issue of the supply chain. And really one of the biggest issue that we face right now is really on the demand side, the fact that we have people or Europeans interested in reptiles as pets, or Chinese interested in wildlife products, for instance. They really need, we really need to tackle this complex issue, which is we really need the society to actually change the behavior. So we need to actually understand why they do that. So why they consume wildlife. So what the motivations are. And then really because at the end of the day, without demand, there wouldn't be a market, there wouldn't be traffickers, and so on and so forth. So the problem we have now is actually that we don't really have much science behind how to reduce the demand, how to stop demand. So our project is really about how to develop a science-based approach to reduce this demand. As I said, I'm very fortunate to get the funding to do this work for about 4 years. And one of the things that we propose to do is really to sort of think about how to build capacity within the region, which includes actually building or creating a behavioral insights unit, where the task is really to sort of understand and reduce the demand for illegal wildlife in the Greater Mekong region, and that actually includes several Southeast Asia countries as well as China. It's a huge market where we constantly see wildlife products flowing from the Mekong region into China, which is a large market, as most people actually know. So we actually recruited people or experts from different disciplines, not just people interested in wildlife conservation, but people who actually dealt with behavior change projects before. So we recruited people who do behavioral economics, psychology, experts in law, as well as ecology, many people from different backgrounds. Hi, can people still hear me?
Yeah, you're fine.
Okay, good. I think I dropped off for a while. 1 second. Right. So the BI unit or the Behavior Insights unit would then come together and actually develop like approaches, interventions, behavioral interventions to try to change the behaviors of the people who are actually consuming certain wildlife products. So as you can see, we have a supply chain, that consists of supply from the site, which is normally in the Southeast Asia. And this project actually funds several, about 8-9 different partner units across different countries. And we are responsible for the demand end, which is really to find innovative and novel ways to reduce this preference for illegally sourced products. So we are actually tying our research from the source actually to the market, so the demand. So what exactly is evidence-based intervention? So unlike many of the interventions that we have seen so far, for instance, campaigns that we actually see in advertisements, campaigns that we see at the airport, at the subway, the metro, and so on and so forth. Most of them are actually, I would say, just really broad and probably targeting entire populace. Most people, right? So, but in actual fact, the people who consume actually have they are very specific group of people, and they may have very specific preferences. So it's important to actually find evidence and try to understand what drives their consumption. So the BI unit actually comes up with science-based findings and use that to try to design and then even trial and even evaluate, how those interventions actually work out in real life, in practice. So we would test them in populations that are targeted, and eventually we would come up with a solution that we could then scale up, work with local governments to then intervene those consumers that we are targeting. So this must include a process to evaluate and monitor the impact of the intervention, so we actually know if it works or not, and how to modify it such that it can actually work even better, so it's more effective. So to sum up, the funding actually allows us to build a behavior insights unit, which is that takes a very interdisciplinary approach, and we worked with different stakeholders, people in the NGOs, people in the government, as well as academic institution. So it's very multi-stakeholder ish, so to speak. And then we also have evidence-based trial interventions, things that we could actually say, whether this particular campaign worked or not. And we would test out large-scale interventions, test for their effectiveness so that we can roll out to a much bigger region. And we hope to eventually develop a guide where people or institutions or governments would actually use them to develop their or personalize their interventions in other regions of the world. So this is the end of my presentation. Thank you.
Giovanna, Bing, thank you both so much. Those are great overviews of contextual differences that I think will lead greatly into our panel discussion. So I have some questions for the panel. So if panelists would like to turn their cameras on, they'd be welcome to. If I could start with Giovanni, please. So Mr. Giovanni Broussard is the regional coordinator at the UNODC Global Wildlife and Forestry Crime Program for South, Southeast Asia, and the Pacific. Giovanni, could you tell us, following on from these examples, what is, in your view, the most successful action that the EU has achieved in tackling wildlife trafficking in the region where you're working?
Thank you, Tanya. So as you said, I work in Southeast Asia. I've been working here for quite some time, and I was lucky enough to witness some of the changes that happened here in the approach of the governments towards the issue of wildlife crime. I must say that the entry into force of this EU action plan back in 2016 did represent a little bit of a change in terms of the amount of resources that were available to support member states here to fight wildlife crime. And it also really had the merit of, in a sense, moving the needle from a merely environmental response to these kind of issues to a more criminal justice-based response. And we were working very much in the area. I see that Mr. Jorge Rodriguez earlier on explained how there are some areas in this action plan related to law enforcement, global partnerships. We were working very much in that space, and we had the opportunity of engaging with law enforcement agencies in each of the countries in Southeast Asia and start to understand what were their challenges in fighting environmental crimes. And let's not forget that until that moment, most of these challenges most of these responses to wildlife crime were within the realm of the environmental agencies, but the traditional law enforcement, like police forces, were not that much involved. So also the prosecution was very limited involved because the number of cases going there was somewhat limited. Then we really had to deal at the beginning with a misconception of wildlife crimes as if there were offenses perpetrated by villagers that go to the forest and fetch some natural resources, poach some animals for providing for the families. And it took us a while to be able to understand, to explain that actually we were talking about transboundary cross-continental commercial activities whereby you could move tons of wildlife parts through logistic efforts across countries, across continent. And that is not an issue that pertains to villagers in the forest, but it's actually something that pertains to organized crime. And then law enforcement agencies started to understand a little bit better that we are talking really about a form of organized crime. At that point, through the funding of the EU and the what was allowed under the action plan, we managed really to start serious capacity building, not only on the most simple forms of crime scene investigation, interview techniques, but we managed also to go into something a little bit more advanced, including DNA forensics, digital forensics, financial investigation and money laundering, controlled deliveries, special investigations that at the beginning were not really used for investigating wildlife crime. So that in itself represented a real change. And through these funds, we really managed to build a lot of capacity. If I may say, and I noticed a comment earlier in the chat box that I really sympathize with. Probably what is still missing a little bit is from the member states of the European Union is actually a more effective use of their law enforcement attaché. All the countries, the member states send the law enforcement attachés in the countries in Southeast Asia, but their focus is very much on the traditional kind of crimes, whether it is drug trafficking or whether it is child sexual exploitation. They don't look specifically at the issue of wildlife crime. Few times I approach some of the law enforcement liaison officers in the region. Some of them have a personal interest, but their capitals are not really asking them to be focused on these kind of crimes, even if there is a link to their to the countries of origin. So this is probably a resource that could be used more in the next iteration of the action plan. Just an idea.
Great. Yeah, thank you so much, Giovanni. And that's a really fascinating kind of evolution of where we've come to in our tackling of wildlife trafficking. And I think part of that conversation, obviously, that's been mentioned is the issue around corruption. So Lee, if I could draw on you, please. So Ms. Lee Nace is the Senior Policy Officer for the Department of Rural Economy and Agriculture Environment Division at the African Union Commission. So Lee, how can we tackle corruption facilitating wildlife poaching and trafficking? Do you have any examples maybe of what's been effective?
Thank you, Tanya. And of course, the issue of corruption had hit our continent more. Of course, the corruption has been fueling the lack of professionalism. For example, our police forces, etc. Due to corruption, they've not been able to maintain the integrity that they're supposed to be working with. And that, of course, has led to this cycle of a corrupt system, and then more corruption feeds into, and then of course linking to illegal wildlife trade. From the AU perspective, I believe the first one would be the political aspect, the political commitment from countries, and at least from the continental level, there has been that level of commitment. So of course we encourage countries, and some of the things which could be done is encourage countries to be members and to ratify and domesticate some of the implementation of agreements, such as of course the CITES, CBD, and also join organizations such as UNTOC and UNCAC. Membership, of course, is not, I mean, ratifying is quite the easier part, and being members, the implementation is where the challenge now comes in. So on the domestication of such conventions or bodies that countries join, so working with countries would require a lot of capacity building, advocacy events. So for example, this morning we had our Africa Environment and Wangari Maathai Day celebrations, and we use such platforms to raise awareness on the challenges from corruption and how they affect natural resources and their management. Then we try to mobilize resources to support such actions. In 2019, we had the theme of the year, which was winning the fight against corruption, a sustainable path to Africa's transformation year. So basically a year of anti-corruption efforts. Of course, it will not stop and end there. Well, there is a body established a few years ago with 46 members who have ratified it, and that's the AU Advisory Board on Corruption. How effective that has been, I cannot know for now, but for sure it shows there's a lot of political will and commitment by countries to work towards that. On the community, yeah, then we have the governance part where we encourage the development and implementation of programs to prevent and combat widely related corruption, promote integrity, this formation of ethics and anti-corruption boards. So I think on that front, I'll stop there on the efforts underway to combat corruption.
Yeah, thank you so much. And I think you raise a really good point about we don't know what's effective. And I think that ties in really well with what Ming was saying about needing this evidence base. And so we need to be monitoring, evaluating all these things that we're trying to really document what works. Yeah, and along that vein, could we now turn to Ms. Maria Socorro Manguet, who's the Senior Legal Officer for the Law Division for the UN Environment Program. So Maria, could you share with us how we can ensure that global frameworks or multilateral agreements are effective in addressing wildlife trafficking? And Lee just raised some of those, the UNTOC, the UNCAC, but I'm sure you have examples of others.
Thank you, and good afternoon from Nairobi, and happy World Wildlife Day. It's a big question and we have limited time, so let me focus on a few aspects which touch upon what we do in the Law Division, and that's mainly how we help to domesticate the legal obligations found in multilateral environmental agreements that relate to wildlife trafficking, as well as other priorities relating to wildlife trafficking. So the first point I'd like to make is that, as everybody knows, wildlife traffic sits within a global framework that is dealing not just with illegal trade, but also with legal trade. And therefore, when we speak of a global framework, and any actions taken under that framework, we have to look at what effect any response to trafficking might have on legal trade. For instance, overregulation might drive some of the activities towards the illegal sphere. And the second point is, I'm glad that you mentioned global frameworks and not just MEAs, because I think those of us who work in this space will know that MEAs cover many important aspects of wildlife trafficking, but there are gaps that are filled by a lot of these non-binding instruments and tools, consortia, and declarations, resolutions. So those 2 points. And with regard to how then a broad approach to defining what falls within that global framework. So although our competency is in resource management and in environmental protection, we recognize that the global framework has to take into consideration also trade regulation, a very important part. And we're not just talking about CITES, but the broader framework of instruments on trade. As already mentioned by several speakers, we also have to look at the crime prevention and criminal justice aspects. That is especially important when it comes to capacity building, both at national level and regional. So at the international level, it's really important to see those interlinkages between those three themes, because at domestic level, when we're implementing, the communities that work within those different spheres have to talk to each other. So I give a specific example. We have, when talking about CITES and wildlife trafficking, brought together in cooperation with UNODC, the CITES management authorities and the prosecutors or the magistrates. And sometimes when we bring them together, they say this is actually the first time that we've spoken to each other, but we recognize now what our roles are. No, so it's that bringing together of these different aspects of the framework. Now, with regard to national legislation, which is, as I said, what I concentrate on, it's very important for the laws to include provisions on international cooperation, including international law enforcement cooperation mechanisms, such as mutual legal assistance, extradition, and joint investigation. So sometimes the problem is that laws, domestic laws, do not include provisions on these international mechanisms, or sometimes even if they do, it's not clear whether they can be applied in the specific context of wildlife trafficking. So that's one important point. It's also very important that, as I said, there is a link between legal trade and illegal trade, so that whatever is put in place domestically on the basis of the global legal framework does not create an undue administrative burden and does not overreach, so that you're pushing legal activities into illegal activities. And then, as speakers have also said, it's also important, even if you have the framework in place, it's been adopted, that there is an emphasis on data collection, on monitoring, and on tracking systems, because how will you know if what you have in place is making a difference unless you have these things? So in brief, those are my initial reflections on the question.
Great, Maria, thank you. I think you raise a great point around cooperation and collaboration and with law enforcement and others. And that brings me to my question back to Giovanna around what about civil society in all of this? Do you have any examples of how the Alliance for Wildlife and Forests, for instance, engage with civil society and the authorities?
Okay, thank you, Tanya. Well, we have different examples and lesson learned working with these two alliances. But based on civil society, well, we, under the frame of the alliance, we support the process of self-declaration to combat wildlife trafficking in a community in Bolivia, and specifically in Tacana community. Through this commitment, the community decided to not allow to or participate in illegal wildlife trafficking activities in their territory. For us, was the first experience to have this achievement with one of the community under this project. We would like to, or we are working to have this an example to try to motivate actions like that in other communities in different countries where we are implementing the actions. By another hand, also, we promote the collaboration with private companies. It's another example, but I'm very happy also to tell you about it, because the largest marketplace company, marketplace in Latin America, Mercado Libre, has joined with actions to fight wildlife trafficking in more than 16 countries. We work now in 4 countries and border area with Brazil, but through this cooperation, we expand our actions in different countries in Latin America. How we did this type of cooperation of working with them. We met them running different activities to detect online trafficking in our region. And after that, after they present the results, they say, okay, it would be a great idea to collaborate together. We would like to know more information, and there is the platform to share about the problem and to try to expand the message about what's happening in online trafficking platforms. Yes, this is two examples working with civil society and also with private companies. With authorities, I think that implementing a regional project is an opportunity. It's an opportunity because we have the opportunity to expand our actions, to share lessons learned, to share the collaboration, and to promote this type of actions between countries as part of regional level. Because today, for example, different panelists mentioned that or remarked that wildlife trafficking is a global problem. And we have to promote this collaboration. And under this project, we try to promote this. For example, the last year, at the end of the year, we implement 3 actions at regional level with authorities. For example, we developed a first sniffer dog training to detect wildlife trafficking. Based on Colombia experience, we invite other countries from our region to share the experience, to know about this technology or tools, to try to expand the knowledge and, okay, say it's possible to work together to change this type of information and knowledge. Another example is that we also, under this alliance, we developed the first forensic capacity analysis in the region, providing different mechanisms to collaborate. The same, we expand the capacity for these 2 countries in the region, in that case, from Colombia and from Brazil, to expand for other countries that always they say, okay, we don't have the capacity, the laboratory capacity or different techniques. Okay, these 2 countries has, and these 2 countries have the information and can exchange this as part of the collaboration together. And at the end, well, also we developed the first regional report on legal frameworks and the cooperation mechanisms in the Andes Amazon with the Andes Amazon countries to fight against the wildlife trafficking. Not only we developed this report, we developed together with authorities, we collect information from them, and also we present or we set different conclusions and recommendations to try to set a roadmap to continue in different actions between authorities and also working together to try to combat this crime in our region. This is the examples that I have today.
Lovely. It's very rich. Thank you, Giovanna. Turning back to Ming, really fascinating stuff there as well around your behavioral change unit or behavioral initiative unit. Could you explain how you think the approach you're deploying in China might be different from other approaches and any lessons you've had from what you've done so far?
Yeah, thanks. Can people hear me? So I was worried that people cannot hear me. Okay, so thanks for the great question. I think it's interesting that you actually mentioned it. So I think you know, over the years, the years that I've been involved in related research, especially with behavioral change, the context is it's probably the single most important variable or factor when we think about changing behavior. I mean, like working in China now, even I mean, China is huge, right? It's huge, and you know, there's tons of culture, you know, tons of different preferences. So what we see in the south of China, for example, where I'm based now, it's very different from what we see in, say, the southwestern or even the northeastern. So there are very different preferences for different products. So to actually put a standard or a awareness raising campaign on subway stations across the major cities, misses the point. So when we do actually our groundwork before we do each intervention, when we design them, what we do is we try to find out where those hot spots are. So places where issues are most prevalent, places where issues are the most problematic. And that's when we actually go in, we dive in there, and then we try to figure out the details, like what really drives these consumption patterns, who are involved. So the profile of the consumers. And for example, one of the product that we actually work on, for instance, looking at this is really preliminary, but we have this ongoing now, which is looking at a product that is quite prevalent only at the borders between, say, Myanmar and China, and beyond that, most people hardly heard about it. So for instance, we are talking about the elephant skin, and this is fascinating because if you were to just broadcast and advertise or do a campaign, for instance, to a lot of people that are outside of the border, you're missing the point. You're wasting money, and you're just wasting resources, and you're not making anything effective. So what we try to do is we have a process in which we first find out what the hotspots are. Then we do a very detailed, focused group interview. We try to figure out why people actually really consume the product, and then we design communication programs that relate to them, to the context, the existing context, right? And then we make sure that they actually reflect that they understand that, right? And this message actually resonates with them. And that's when we test the effectiveness, and that's when we work with local governments to actually promote it beyond the scale that we actually designed the trial intervention. So it becomes a process in which I think more places should sort of adopt. Of course, you really have to know what you're doing, and you really need to know who are the people involved and how best to affect them. So this is actually the major difference with our program, and compared to many of those that are available right now that we actually see. Most people see it but don't really retain it, partly because it doesn't really relate to them. So we really need to find the people who are I would say the relevant ones, the ones that are the actual consumers. Thank you.
Yeah, that's great, Ming. Thank you. I think that's really valuable insight. If we could just stick with demand reduction for a second, Maria, what have we learned from the work on demand reduction? Do you have any lessons learned? Because I don't think we've cracked it, but we're working on it, right?
Thanks. Building on what Ming said and based on our experience, some of you may know that we had a Wild for Life campaign, which was linked to a broader illegal trade in wildlife project. So the aim was to change behavior, and the project evaluation, which is an independent evaluation done by experts, indicated that we had much more potential and didn't really quite reach the goal of changing behavior. We had clearly increased awareness. You could see from the numbers, the hits on the website, the morphs, and all the and everything, the response. But the increase in the level of awareness did not necessarily translate to a change in behavior or values. And part of the reason was that I think the campaign and many of the products were very broad in the target audience. So it's going back to what Ming said, no? You are not talking about a homogeneous target audience where one message will resonate with this person and that person. So it is an expensive exercise because you do have to put a lot of research into it. But if you want it to work, you do have to put the research into crafting the response that you see from the motivation that that the research brings out. Having said that, one small success that was pointed out in the evaluation of that campaign was for a specific sector in China, the luxury sector, and the links to products that should not have been traded, the wildlife products that should not have been traded. It seems that celebrity power worked. So having certain celebrities identifying with the message of save wildlife seemed to resonate with a specific niche audience in China. It was also very important to be linking up with government authority. We had campaigns in airlines, airports, and it was necessary to have the buy-in both of the government and the private sector. But much more work needs to be done in this area. Thanks.
Yeah, thank you. Lee, I'm wondering how local communities fit into all of this. I mean, not only in terms of demand reduction, but just overall, how can we better engage with our local communities in tackling wildlife trafficking?
So local communities, of course, they are the ones who directly benefit from the wildlife resources, we call them that, at least those living adjacent to it. I'm thinking of communities both in not just the urban and rural, but also in the rural areas. They depend on the wild fauna and flora. I'm looking at communities living around national parks, and this came out now with COVID. As soon as the travel restrictions were put in, those community people who are working in hotels, in the tourism, the whole tourism chain almost got unemployed. So communities around protected areas, for example, are key in whatever we do in wildlife management. Why are communities important? They usually know stuff. They know things that nobody else would know around outside that community. They will tell you who is a thief and where his bad behavior comes from and which relative might have transmitted these bad genes to this person. So they usually know a lot. They know each other. They know if there's a poacher, they'll know who's corrupt. They know all that. They may not be willing to talk to anyone about it because they are learned to live with the criminal or the corrupt official. But if you talk to them, of course, over a cup of tea, they will tell you, yeah, we know the son of so-and-so, we are trying to teach him and he's not learning or he's not changing. Sometimes they may choose to do something about it. Most of the time they'll decide to let it go and wait for, but rarely they would take that person to the police unless they really push it to the extreme end. For example, a corrupt guy in the village, they will not do much there. But it's important to involve the community in several fronts. First, ensure that they are benefiting as much as possible from these resources for you to get cooperation from them. Otherwise, they will turn into these other practices which may encourage, they'll be victims to corruption and yeah, because they will have no alternative. But then when they know that this forest or this area is protected for a particular reason, they kind of benefit from it. They usually are more collaborative and they'll be the ones coming to and reporting out the cases. There's also a little bit of need to train. I know the awareness levels are different. As Maria says, awareness could be at 100% for everybody, but then it doesn't necessarily change the behavior. Because there are two parts of it we all know, but then maybe we've not been equipped with the tools to change the behavior at that particular time. So there's need, I don't know if it's more research on this, how to ensure that awareness translates to behavior change. I don't know, but I know there are two separate parts, which one is not connected to the other. But the reason one will not change is because they do not have an alternative to what they're doing. So yeah, and it goes beyond, of course, wildlife. It goes all the way to littering and pollution of marine spaces, which are obviously also harboring our wildlife areas. The other way is inclusive governance. Make sure they're part of the decision-making process. It's good to have government officials coming and telling everybody what to do. But if the community is not involved in that process of deciding and informing and advising on the best way forward to deal in the different settings, then it will not work. They'll just be thinking those are the government people. They are two separate bodies, but they do listen to each other. And when they are engaged, they are really, most of them collaborate and support government efforts. Depending on whether if those government efforts are actually good for them, they will also know, because sometimes the government efforts may not be what the community wants. So there's always that contradiction of what government thinks is right and what the community feels is right. So there are, of course, issues of there's that need to harmonize the needs of the community and the government policies. So strengthening the ability to be involved in decision-making processes would be important, because yes, they want to be part of the process on how to contribute to policy, but they don't know how to. They don't know that they could reach out to the local government and give their opinions about certain issues. So they would need a bit of training on told how can they contribute to big decisions being adopted. For example, yesterday there was this adoption of the legally binding agreement on plastic, but how does a person at the grassroots know that they can contribute to this? Otherwise, it's just a top-down where they're told, okay, we now have this good law that is going to help you not litter around or not to cut your forest or to benefit more from wildlife. So strengthening them to be able to know that they can contribute to not just at the local level, they can contribute at the regional as well as even shape global policies on some of these issues. The enabling environment as well. Sometimes the communities have different cultures depending on the gender aspects and age. So sometimes bringing them in different platforms, you could get more out of it than trying to group everyone in one group and call them community members. And also try to use one of their own to do that kind of assessment or research, but anyway, to engage the communities more, I think that would be key before even working with governments, etc.
Yeah, thank you, Lee.
For now,
Yes, sorry to interrupt. Thank you so much. That great point about the communities and engagement. So we have one. I'm just going to end really with if we could turn back to Giovanni, if you could just maybe wrap up with the big picture. Any global initiatives that have been successful at tackling wildlife trafficking?
Tanya, successful is probably a difficult word to apply to initiatives that are tackling wildlife crime. There have been improvements over time on many fronts. One that I'm particularly pleased to see is in the field of international cooperation. Countries are really starting to work a little bit more together. It's not optimal yet. We're not even close to optimal, but we've seen really a concrete improvement. It takes time. It's incremental process, and that builds on some level of trust. And we should not assume that international cooperation it means automatically mutual legal assistance and other formal exchange of evidence and these kind of things. It's very often informal cooperation that can take place also via emails, via WhatsApp, or via the law enforcement attaché that are working in different countries, a level of informality of networks that is actually proving to be very effective. And that's the process that I'm observing with much more interest, because in the past few years, we've seen more and more of that. And there are countries that used to be a little bit outside of the international cooperation schemes, for instance, China, that instead now, in the past few years, has become a much more relevant, much more active player, sharing intelligence with other countries, collecting, receiving, but also sharing their own intelligence, which is actually leading to actual arrest, actual prosecution, actual takedown of transnational syndicates. So these are good signs that are going in the right direction. I think that rather than talking about success, we rather talk about positive signs, positive indications that things are working. And one last thing that I wanted to say that may have a global relevance, even if it's mainly focused on Southeast Asia, is that the EU is also funding a new activity on trying to understand the links between wildlife trade and the prevention of potential zoonotic diseases linked to wildlife. And that's certainly an area that is of relevance for the entire globe, not only for for Southeast Asia. So even there, it's very early to talk about success, but the fact that we are in a position to talk and analyze and conduct some more exploration on this link between how humans use wildlife and how wildlife can be the trigger of a next pandemic is really a crucial element. And I'm glad that the European Union is funding initiatives in this on this front. That's it from my side. Sorry, Tanya, it took too long.
No, not at all. Thank you so much to everyone on the panel. It was a really fascinating and excellent discussion. We are going to leave it there, and I'm going to turn it back to Jorge Rios for some concluding remarks. Thank you so much.
Tanya, thank you very much, and thank you to the fantastic panel that was with you. And I'd like to say hello to all of the friends and colleagues on the second panel. Let me just again thank everyone. Let me start by thanking WCS for co-hosting with us. WCS is a partner in anti-crime in trying to ensure that criminals don't get away with the exploitation, the trafficking, trade of wildlife. So thank you very much to the World Conservation Society and all of the colleagues from WCS that have participated in helping this helping to make this happen, but also for the technical presentations that they've made. Equally important for me is to thank Tanya Wyatt, who I didn't introduce. She's a criminologist from Northumbria University. Tanya, thank you very much for stepping in, and it's always a pleasure to work with you. I think in closing, what I'd like to say, besides thanking everyone for their time and joining us, is Happy World Wildlife Day. It's important to recognize the role that all of us play as independent citizens, but also as those who work in agencies who have a relevant stake in working with working with each other to safeguard our natural resources. In this case, the wonders of the natural world in wildlife. And perhaps the last thing I'd like to say is thank the EU for their leadership on the issue, recognizing some of the shortcomings that the EU as a whole has, trying to put together documents that really try to fill those gaps, anticipate new gaps that can be exploited. And from our side, and I think I speak for a lot of the colleagues, we look forward to continuing to support you in your consultations, in your deliberations, to reach a very relevant, robust, and meaningful and useful EU action plan on wildlife. So without further ado, from Vienna, I'd like to thank everyone for taking their time, and I wish you and your family much health and happiness on the way forward. And let's all convene together again next year to see exactly what the progress has been on this and other issues. If I've missed anything, Olga, please let me know. Otherwise, I will say thank you very much and have a wonderful afternoon or evening wherever you may be.